Hello and welcome to episode 107 of the Haskincast podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and I am so excited to bring you my guest this week. This is someone who I just have great respect and appreciation for. She works so hard and does so much and is doing a lot for the community, especially during the lockdown, to help people on the front lines, on top of all the amazing work that she's done on Broadway, on television, and movies. We didn't even get to talk about the movies, but there's so many amazing things that she's done as an artist and just as a great human being. And we're going to get into all of those things, or as many of them as we can in the time that we had. But very, very grateful that she was able to take some time out. This really meant a lot to me, and to be able to share with you guys all the things that you may not already know. That's one of the wonderful things I think about the podcast world. And when I was on Joshua Note's show, The Note Show, this Saturday, he had asked me why people should listen to podcasts. And that's a good part of it. It's the ability to hear things that you might not have avenues to hear otherwise. Podcasting has become so accessible for people now. And I've been working in the podcast. I can't speak, but I can be in the business for the last few years, editing some other shows, having started another podcast, and then working on this one. But it really is a great medium for people that are in entertainment, or people that want to know about history or whatever. But take everything with a grain of salt. If you're not hearing it directly from the source, I always encourage people to do their research. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. I could sit here and tell you all these things that sound like facts that may not be. So always do your research and make sure that if you're not hearing the information directly from the people involved with whatever it is that you're learning about, obviously if it's something historical, there's limitations there. But be aware of what you're hearing, what you believe, and what you're spreading to others. I think that in this world of accessible media, it's just too easy to get caught into things that aren't necessarily true. So always fact check, verify, do what you need to do. But I had a great time on the Note Show this past Saturday when I interviewed Josh last weekend. We did our interview for the Haskincast podcast, then flipped it around and he interviewed me for the Note Show. It was about a 4-hour phone call from here to London, but it was absolutely enjoyable, so fantastic. I had a great time talking to Josh on both conversations. And so go check that out. Now it is available on thenoteshow.com. on Stitcher Radio, it is not on the Podbean app, but it is available on Apple Podcasts as well. I'm pretty sure it's on Spotify, but the easiest place is to just go to thenoteshow.com and you can pick up the interview there. He's done a lot of great interviews since he started the Note Show back up after a few years hiatus, and I'm so glad he did because I've really enjoyed listening to every show that he's done. And very, very grateful and honored to be a part of that. So thank you again, Joshua. I loved every minute of it. Let's see what else is going in here. So I'm working on the single that was on the radio, doing a re-release of that. I have some new guitar tracks, and I'm working on getting the mix together. I'm really happy with the sound of it, but the mix is it's a big one for me. So it has a lot of components going on. It's a little bigger than what I'm used to working on. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but I'll get there. And hopefully that will be around the end of May, early June. And then as soon as that's done, I'll be working on finishing up the new album that will be out in hopefully early to mid-July. And that one is going to be an instrumental album. It's not a mental sauna album. It's not relaxation music per se, but it is going to be instrumental. A lot of the songs that I've written over the years, including the remake of Dreamscape, which was the first song I wrote that got on the radio. This single that I'm releasing is actually the second song I wrote that got on the radio. So I'm very excited to put these out for everyone. Dreamscape is available as a single now on Amazon and Spotify and Google Play and iTunes and all of that sort of thing. So if you look up Scott K as in Kevin Haskin, and you go to singles, you can find Dreamscape, or you can search for me in Dreamscape, however you want to do it. But it was the first instrumental / new age song that I wrote, and it kind of set me on that path that was inspired really by Patrick O'Hearn, who was the bass player for Missing Persons in the 80s. And then he went on to have just a really amazing career as a composer. He's written so many beautiful songs. And that was really what originally set me in that direction. So Dreamscape was the first one I wrote in that vein, and was actually one of the first songs that I wrote at all. So it's kind of a fun one, and it has a personal, real big personal connection for me, as really all my songs do. But this one was kind of the beginning of the escalator, if you will. So that's pretty much what's going on with me, and I am very, very excited to bring you my interview with the wonderful, amazing, lovely, and talented Ilene Graff. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Haskincast podcast. I am so excited to have my guest on this week. She is absolutely amazing. You already love her, even if you don't know it. Let's welcome to the show, Ilene Graff. Ilene, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And you? Everything going okay?
Yes, lovely. It's a little surreal here in Vegas. You've lived here. Imagine the lights on, but nobody being home.
Well, I lived in Vegas in the 50s when I was a little girl. My dad was a singer, and he had a singing quartet that was very, very popular. They played the Sands and the Sahara, and, back when Vegas was Vegas, like fancy, we used to get dressed up all the time, and so my Vegas memories are just so fond, and I loved it. So, but Vegas is very different now, and I can't even imagine what it's like on Las Vegas Boulevard right now with nary a soul in sight. It has to be just spooky.
It really is. It's almost haunting.
Yeah.
You brought up a good point, though. You lived here when Vegas was a lot different than it is today. It wasn't so much commercialized as it is now. But I have to think that in those days, a show was an event instead of just a thing that you do. And I find that when I go to some of the shows at the end, no matter how spectacular the show is, no matter how much people have clapped, there's no standing ovation at the end. And that feels weird to me. Would that be weird for you?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because in some ways I feel that standing ovations have lost a lot of meaning these days. Mm-hmm. I notice it with a lot of shows, like Broadway shows, where and I understand, people that go to Broadway shows, for example, not necessarily. They just also the shows mostly the audiences are tourists. It's one of the highlight things to do in Las Vegas. When we go to Vegas, we see friends and whatever, but we always go see shows, and it's one of the things you do.
Right. Especially
it's because nowhere in the world you get such a concentration of so many spectacular shows. And I think, my daughter was in a show in Vegas for a while. She did a peep show at what show? At the Hard Rock? Is that where it was? I don't remember. No, not the Hard Rock. And she felt doing that show that there was kind of a disconnect between, and I think this plays into what you say, people see shows and they forget that the people are real because we watch so much TV, and there's such a separation between us psychologically and most of what we watch in our lives that there seems to be a kind of disconnect between the audience and the performers. And she said it would take audiences a while to warm up until they realized that the people on stage were real. Wow. And then they would get into it. But I totally understand. I really understand, and I feel it on Broadway also. It's like sometimes people don't understand that when you take out your phone and you start texting and you start taking pictures and all of that, that there are people on stage who are killing themselves for you. And you just, it's impolite. It's just not. On the other hand, there are some concerts or whatever where you are encouraged to do that, and it's great fun. But a lot of the kind of work that I do, or that you see on Broadway, or when people in Cirque du Soleil or whatever are literally risking their lives for you, you sort of want to give them a little bit of respect.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right about the disconnect, because I remember when September 11th happened and I was watching the news live when the second tower got hit, and it didn't seem real to me. It seemed like I was watching a Die Hard movie, and I don't think it sunk in until quite some time later. So I think you're really onto something there.
That's so interesting that you should say that. because it did look, in some ways, if you were just watching it on TV, it did look like, it could easily have looked like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, for those of us that had family and friends in New York, I mean, my brother called me that morning from New York. He was living in New York at the time. He said, I just want you to know that we're safe, we're fine.
Yeah.
And it was 7 o'clock in the morning or something here, 6 to 7 in the morning. I said, what are you talking about? He said, oh, turn on the TV. So it was a very different experience, but you're right. We're so used to special effects and all the amazing things that can be done with technology nowadays on screens that we have no idea, even when we see a film, if what we're seeing is real or CGI. We just don't know.
Well, when you can make a movie like Sharknado and make it look like it's really happening, I think that there's no limit to the blur between reality and fiction anymore.
Yeah. And what's cool is that there are so many incredibly clever and smart and creative people that are working on the technology side, and they should be applauded for the amazing work that they do. At the same time, when we're feeling like, oh, I wish that I could tell if it was real or not.
Right. Well, that's, I think, part of the reason that the Harry Potter credits are about 20 minutes long, because they do take the time to make sure that everybody involved gets some kind of appreciation. And I really am grateful that they do that. I think it's so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious, when you were performing in Broadway, now you did was it the very first run of Grease? I know you weren't the first Sandy, you took over, but was that the first run ever on Broadway?
Well, I replaced the original Sandy in the original company. So I was not the very, very first person who played the role on Broadway. I was the second person. But it was the original production, I started the show in December of 1972, before all the revivals. That was it. It was a small, scrappy little show that went on to be fabulously successful, and I stayed with it for 2.5 years, and it was a super duper great part of my life.
Well, it's amazing to me what that has become. I mean, the fan base of that is huge. But when you were doing it, did you have an inkling that it could grow to be what it is today?
Oh, no. I mean, it was just a fun show. But, when I look back on it, there were hints, because we would have people who came back to see the show many, 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 many times. They said, why do you keep coming back? And I said, we just love it. We just love it. And you have to remember that in the 70s, the 50s were only 20 years before that.
Right.
So we all knew those people for real. I mean, I really knew a Sonny. I really knew a Rizzo. And now, we're so far removed from it generationally, nobody knows anybody that's exactly like that. But the characters are so nice and strong and so wonderful and funny and appealing that they go on and on at a different level.
Oh, absolutely. And it was such a great experience, I would imagine, to be a part of that. But I know that Adrienne Barbeau worked with you. Was that in Grease?
Yes, actually, Adrienne left right before I started.
Oh.
She got Maude. Yeah, she moved out to California. She left just a few months. I knew her. We were friends. But she had gotten Maude, which was such a huge deal. One of us got a big TV series, left New York and moved to California. And so we did the show together. But we are still part of the same group, the same people that did the show beginning. And she's a wonderful person.
I'm really curious to get your opinion on this, because I've read this from a couple of different sources, and there's a sort of fan fiction theory going around that the story of Grease actually takes place after everyone's dead. And I thought that was interesting. I don't think I really know the story well enough to have a thought on it, but what do you think about that?
That there's an opinion going around that Grease... Could you just repeat that? I didn't follow exactly what you said.
That they all die at the beginning and everything that takes place in the story is actually in the afterlife.
Oh, God, no, not at all. That's the story that's Forever Plaid. That's what happens in the show Forever Plaid. The singing group gets killed in a bus crash and they're in heaven singing their songs. No, not at all. Grease is not, no. It takes place at it's the memories of what happened at the high school reunion. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Yeah, that seems more reasonable to me. I mean, it would be nice to think that there was some other level of existence in the mind of a writer that we're just discovering, but I don't know. That one just seemed a little far out to me. But that happens a lot. I mean, when you were on Mr. Belvedere, weren't there all kinds of rumors about things that just were completely out of left air?
Well, I think the weirdest thing that went around was that there were all these rumors that Rob Stone, who played the eldest son, Kevin, was really, who is that guy? Some really strange rock and roll guy. I can't even.
Marilyn Manson, probably.
Oh, Marilyn Manson. Yes, there was this whole rumor going around, and I was getting phone calls and messages from people. Is Rob really Marilyn Manson? I said, no, not at all. Where did that come from? That is the strangest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I don't know. These things just sort of pop into people's minds, and I think they just have a whole lot of fun seeing how far they can get a rumor to fly, because there's no basis in truth of most rumors. There's no basis in truth at all. But our show, we escaped a lot of that. We were just a nice little family comedy, and we didn't have a whole lot of Hollywood stuff, weird publicity or anything. We just sort of went to work every day and had a nice time and put on a nice show. And I'm glad that's how it was.
It was definitely a good time to have a show on, because you could ride that really nice balance between being somewhat sitcom, but being somewhat serious, teaching lessons, but being entertaining, and it not feeling too emotional until you really meant it to. Like, you really had the opportunity to drive a point home when you wanted.
Well, that's a nice thing to say. Our show, and sometimes people look askance at this, but we did several of what they used to, of episodes where we tried to, we called them very special episodes. That's what it was. Mm-hmm. Very special episodes where we attacked a serious subject and tried to couch it in comedy, but nevertheless, we talked about, we were the very first family, show to talk about AIDS, the very, very first one, and won, awards for doing that. And we did an episode about child abuse and about teenage pregnancy and alcoholism and pills and drugs. But we did them in a way that we didn't hit anybody over the head with it. We wanted to show that these are issues that families face, and how do families, it's a TV show, so it's not totally realistic, but we always wanted to show that the family is the strong unit. Mm-hmm. And mom and dad are there, and they're going to love you, and they're going to protect you, and they're going to take care of you and support you. And that was always the overriding theme. And Mr. Belvedere was there to be the voice of reason and the intelligence and the compassion. And that was always the point that we wanted to show, is that a family cares about each other and a family takes care of each other. So whether we were doing a very special episode or, a really silly episode, it was always about the family.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing about that show, as opposed to, I think, a lot of the other shows around that time, was that the parents and Mr. Belvedere were not infallible. Like, there were many episodes where you guys, just as much as the children, were responsible for not being perfect. And I love that. I just moved, and while I was unpacking, I hooked up my laptop. I had season 3 on DVD. And so I started binge watching it while I was unpacking. And there was the episode you mentioned about when you were taking pills. And I thought there were not a lot of episodes where the parents were kind of the ones that were responsible for the mischief. And I liked how real you guys were as weren't doing it.
I think they really wanted to show that we are all fallible, that mom and dad are not goddesses, that things can happen to anybody, and that you threw the bad no matter which member of the family you are, because you have the family there. But yes, indeed, mom, did stupid things, and the pills episode was a big deal at the time, and it was a big deal for me, because I always felt honored when they trusted me with things like that. I was the one that they felt could handle a delicate situation, and I was happy to do those episodes.
Yeah, and that was such a great one. I thought that was definitely of the shows that I remember one of your best performances. But I also love that your character was kind of a female role model too, because here you are, you're working on raising a family, but you're also going to law school, which was certainly not easy. And I don't think a lot of it was a good thing that women were shown to have careers and that you weren't just the underlings to your male dominant people.
Right. Yes. The law school thing came in at a certain point, and I think they just, as you say, wanted to give her more to do, wanted her to be more of a reflection of what was really going on in the world. And I think they wanted to show that she was smart, which I thought was great. Let's give her something really hard to do. Let's make her go to law school. And I don't know if you have friends that went through law school, but I certainly did. It's really hard.
Yeah.
Much hard. Oh, and whenever I had to learn legalese, when I had to spout legal stuff, I would just break out in hives. Like, I'm going to learn these words, but I don't know what they mean.
Well, and I think that's what's especially amazing about the pill episode, because you had a lot of dialogue, and some of it you had to deliver very, very quickly because you're all hopped up on these pills. Was that a lot of takes, or was that you just blew through it and nailed it?
Mostly we try to do stuff in one take. When you do a show like ours, a multiple camera show, you try to do it like you're doing a play. So you start at the beginning, you try to get as much as you can all at once. And then if if you make a mistake, they stop, they do it again. And then after the audience leaves, we do what they call pickups, where, this really wasn't working, we have to redo this and that kind of thing. But with the pills episode, my best recollection was a long time ago, is that they just let me get a straight shot. Like, I had that one scene in Doris Roberts' office. She was playing a judge, I think. That was a different episode. But I do remember I had that I had a long, complicated speech, and I'm cleaning the office and engaging in all of this hopped up energy while I'm saying all these lines. And they just let me have a clean shot at it. It was like I was shot out of a cannon and just do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the only way you could actually do something like that.
That would make sense. I'm not an actor, but the little bit of acting that I have done, I just have so much respect for people that can pull off scenes like that. It's just amazing to me. But you guys shot in front of a studio audience, and I believe that your audience warm-up guy was Bob Furlough. Was that right?
Yes, our first audience warm-up guy was Bob Furlough. Do you know Bob?
Not personally, but I attended a taping of the show Penn and Teller Fool Us last year.
Oh, I love that show.
Oh, it's amazing.
I love that show.
I'm pretty sure he was our warm-up guy because the name sounded really familiar. And he said that he did a bunch of shows in the 80s. And I know he did Growing Pains and Family Ties. I can't remember if he said Mr. Belvedere or not. But yeah, I very well could have been him.
Well, Bob Furlough there's a handful of people that do that work because it's really hard work. So Bob was with us, I think, for our first season. And then a guy named Michael Berger was our warm-up guy for most of the time that we were there. And he went on to have a very successful career. He had his own daytime talk show. He hosted game shows. He's just great. But Furlough, I've worked with him on a couple of other shows before, and he was the warm-up guy for the pilot. And he was the one that when he took me aside at one point, he said, "This is a good show. Don't worry about it. You're going to go. It's going to go." He said, I've done hundreds of these, but this feels like a show. And that really gave us a lot of confidence. Sometimes you just want to talk to a worker. You don't want to get the executive spin. You don't want to get the network spin. You don't want to get any spin. Mm-hmm. What does the camera guy think? What does the warm-up guy think? Because they're the ones that are in the trenches.
Yeah. I have to give props to anybody who would do that job, because that is a very, very difficult and exhausting job.
It's exhausting. exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And both Bob and Michael Berger are just brilliant at it.
I have to ask you one more question about this show, if you don't mind. I was listening to some interviews that you had done in preparation for today, and you mentioned the fact that Bob Uecker was the star of Mr. Belvedere. And I have to say, I was a little bit taken aback by that, because I always felt that he was a co-star or supporting to Mr. Belvedere, because it feels like it's Mr. Belvedere's story.
Right. Well, the title character is Mr. Belvedere. But Bob was the one who was attached to the project from the beginning. So this was a show that was developed for him. He was very popular at the time. He had all those great Miller Lite beer commercials. Mm-hmm. He had made the movie Major League. He was one of Johnny Carson's favorite guests. And he was very, very popular. And he was attached to this project. So although the show is called Mr. Belvedere, and Christopher really was a great star, a wonderful star, Bob was really the driving force behind the show. So I think that, they were really a team. It was like the two of them were really the stars of the show. But as I say, originally it was a show that Bob was part of from the very beginning. So it was kind of his show in that sense. You know what I mean?
That makes sense. And I kind of wish that they would have done some sort of skit or spinoff where they were kind of an Abbott and Costello, like a refined Abbott and Costello, because I think they could have pulled that off really well.
Well, they were great together. You could not find two guys who were more dissimilar. Christopher was a super duper trained English actor who had a very distinguished stage career as well as a distinguished film career. And Bob was a baseball player who happened to be very successful in show business, but he still was an athlete with an athlete's mind. And the two of them just could not be more different, and they adored each other. They absolutely adored each other, and they got along great, and they were so funny together. It was a case of opposites attract with the two of them, and their affection for each other just radiated throughout the show, and certainly on our stage, as a working, where you have to go to work every day, was delightful.
Oh, sure. And you could definitely tell, even within the context of the show, that their characters really had an affection for each other. And I have to think that there was a lot of reality behind that. And that really leads me to a question of how you, when you have to deal with somebody that you really like in life in a difficult way, like perhaps when you were raising your daughter, there might have been a time she did something and you have to be the stern parent, but you're loving. Is it harder to do that as an actor to your on-screen child than it is maybe in real life, or is real life harder?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. When you're acting, you get a script, you learn the lines, and you act. Mm-hmm. You do it appropriately for the scene and the situation that you're in. When you have your own child, it's a very, very different situation. Mm-hmm. There's nobody there to give you the lines to say. There's nobody there to tell you how you should say it or how stern you should be, or you're on your own. So I probably brought, you bring a lot of your own personality to your show, especially as they begin to know you. You get hired to play a character, and then after the first year, everybody knows each other so well that they start writing to you and doing stuff that they think you're going to be good at, and Sure. They start writing the way you actually talk and stuff like that. But nobody was ever around when my daughter needed a stern talking to tell me exactly what it was I was supposed to say. And I must say, my daughter was a very easy child, and she rarely needed a stern talking to. But there were times that I would look at her and say, I don't know what I'm supposed to say now. I'm supposed to say something very wise and funny and stern, and I don't have the words. So consider yourself spoken to.
Well, speaking of your daughter, now she has a podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, my daughter is a musical theater performer in New York. In fact, she was doing an off-Broadway show when all the theaters were closed and all the shows shut down. So that was that was very difficult and very sad. I mean, the whole thing is tragic and extremely sad. But on a personal level, for her, to be in the middle of a nice, very successful run of a show and then all of a sudden have it to be over was really terribly sad. And happily, my husband and I were able to go to New York before it closed, and we got to see it a couple of times, so that was great. But she's been a musical theater performer now professionally for, 13, 14 years. And she originally had a podcast with a friend called The Ensemblist, which was about all the ensemble players in Broadway shows and regional shows and whatever. Not the stars, but the other people. And it's very successful. In fact, it's still on the air. She's not a part of it anymore. She's moved on. She is a mental health advocate and a labor leader and a community activist. She's really quite accomplished in many areas. And her new podcast with her partner, Julianne, is called Only Slightly Dead Inside. And the tagline of their podcast is putting the fun in functional depression.
That's clever.
Nika and Julianne talk about the challenges of living with depression and anxiety. And they do it from a personal point of view, not from a medical point of view, because the first thing they say is we are not doctors, we are not therapists, we are two people who live through this, and we want you to know if you're living through it, you are not alone. And they talk about a lot of issues surrounding depression and anxiety. And it's really good. It's tough. Sometimes it's tough listening to, but I think they're doing a tremendous service. And it's called Only Slightly Dead Inside. And I urge anybody who's got issues, give them a listen and see if it helps at all.
I would say that's a great thing. And I love that they're doing that. And I would say even beyond that, if you have friends or family that suffer through some of these issues too, it might be worth listening to see how you can maybe work with them a little bit more, help them out too. Because a lot of times the biggest problem is identifying the issue, because you can't really fix what you don't know is broken.
You said it. That's a really, really good way of putting it. And you're right, it helps the families, because as someone who doesn't have depression or anxiety, sometimes it's hard for me to understand, well, why can't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? And I've been around it long enough to know that you can't. Right. I'm doing my best. I'm struggling through this. So you can't have the same expectations on me as you would someone who doesn't deal with this brain quirk that is depression. So I think they're doing a great community service. It's funny, it's heartfelt, it's educational, and it's a lot of just two girlfriends talking about what they're going through. And I think lots of people can identify as having this, or are wondering, why do I don't feel right all the time. Everybody else is this way and I'm that way. It's helpful.
I agree. And I'm really grateful she's doing that. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
Do you know what I did this morning?
Nope.
I learned that somebody can make me appreciate the music of Annie again. I listened to your album, Baby's Broadway Lullabies, and I absolutely loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Now, I was just going to say, as some of my listeners might know, I have my own relaxation series, and the last album I did in that series was for birthing. And this is just such a beautifully orchestrated, not over-the-top Broadway production, but it has a Broadway real fantasy feel to it. It's like you took all the ballads and made lullabies out of them.
Well, they're not all ballads, actually. I mean, the first song on the CD is Lullaby of Broadway, which is very razzmatazz. Come on along, da-da-da. It's a very razzmatazz song. But what we wanted to do was take Broadway show tunes, no matter what kind they were, and turn them into lullabies, because when my daughter was a baby, I used to sing her show tunes as lullabies, to put her to sleep. And then one day my husband and I said, these are really pretty. We should do something with this. Yeah. She shouldn't be the only one hearing these. And we were super careful about how we recorded each one. And, my husband He's a big-time musician, Doug Lanzarone, and he's a very creative arranger and composer. And he did all of the arrangements. And what we wanted to do was start on the CD with the song that sort of had the most going on musically, and then wind down. So each one is a little bit less, until the last song is almost barely there. And hopefully by that time, the baby's asleep. And I always say to people, enjoy it, listen to it, just don't listen to it in the car.
That's what I always say about my stuff. My music is called the Mental Sauna series, and it's designed to help you relax. If you want to meditate, do yoga or whatever, but it's mostly designed for sleep. So the wheel is not the place to listen to this kind of music.
Yeah, don't listen to it. And the other thing that we did was back when there was an A side and a B side, when I was coming up, albums had two sides. Mm-hmm. So we did half of the album with the vocals, and then the second half is just the musical tracks. Mm. So in case you want to sing along, in case you want to use your voice and sing to your baby, you can do that. Or if you just want to have music playing without the vocals, you have that as well.
That's brilliant. And I have to say, I loved the style that you sang in, because you used some vibrato in some very nice places, but it wasn't over the top vibrato. It was just very gentle. You just sang very angelic throughout the whole album. And I thought, this is exactly what lullaby vocals should be. They shouldn't be distracting. They should just flow along with the music. And I think you really accomplished something very special with this album, you and your husband both.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. It's always fun to talk to someone who gets it.
I think when I first started listening to it, the words that I wrote down were magical fantasy land.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
That's what hit me right off the bat. And I really enjoyed it fully. I will listen to that often, I will say.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love it. Even after all these many years, and it came out a long time ago, but I think it still holds up because it doesn't really have it's not a modern style or an old-fashioned style. It's lullaby style. Mm-hmm. And, those tunes, Broadway show tunes are good. They're well constructed, and they have a beginning and a middle and an end, and the songs have great strength all by themselves.
I agree. And I kind of tend to think, though, that music, while it may take you back to a certain era, depending on when it was written or in the style or just the sound of the recording, like in the 60s, music just sounded a certain way because of the way it was recorded. But I kind of feel like music is just a timeless thing.
Well, I think some songs are timeless. I think that some songs are not. And as you say, certain songs just bring us back to a different era. Mm-hmm. And I think that's fun in itself. You listen to disco and you go, oh my God, disco. You wouldn't necessarily want to do that now. But I think when you have great songs, you have a Gershwin song or a Cole Porter song, or, those kinds of standard songs, new generations are always discovering them, and they're always being re-recorded. So there is a certain kind of song that lends itself to lots of different kinds of interpretation. And there are songs that don't. And we enjoy those other songs because of where it brings us back. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? It takes us back. You play a 50s oldie and, you feel, oh, I remember I said, please. Oh, that was so much fun, or whatever.
Every time I hear the song We Are Family, I think about two things immediately come to mind. One was a commercial that it was used in Detroit, where I grew up, and I have that visual of the fountain, the way that they showed it. And the other thing is tornadoes, because I remember that song came on the radio when we were hiding under the basement stairs waiting to see if our house was going to get taken or not. So,
oh my God, what song? I didn't hear what you said about which song.
It was We Are Family.
Oh, We Are Family.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Which when you're cuddled, you're huddled under the stairs with your family, I guess it's sort of appropriate, but it's.
Oh my gosh, you were huddled under the stairs in a tornado.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was the spring in Michigan. We were one of the 5 tornado counties, so that was fairly common for us. But it's music is such a collective experience, but it's also a personal experience at the same time. And you have a program called Making the Song Your Own, and I'd love to learn a little more about that.
Well, Making the Song Your Own Vocal Performance Workshop is a class that my husband and I teach. And what we do in our workshop, in our class, is first of all, most of my students are not professional singers. They're I have a lot of people who used to be music majors, or they used to sing, and then life sort of presented itself so that they said, I'm probably not going to make it in the music business. I think I need to find a profession. So I've had every profession in our workshop, you name it, flight attendants, lawyers, publicists, judges, everything you can imagine. But it's people who love to sing and love music. And we come together, and the community, as you say, the community that music forms, I think is very precious. And for those of us that love music and love to sing, to be in a room full of people who feel the same way is very energizing and empowering and just plain groovy. So what we do is we encourage everybody to look at their own life and their own life experience and pick songs that they relate to personally. And then we show people how to perform those songs so that the audience understands the story of the song. So you hear we talk a lot about storytelling and emotional connection. I mean, there's jargon, of course, in this world, as there is in every world. And it's great. Everybody improves. Everybody gets better. Everybody's singing better. They're entertaining better. And I love it so much. I love seeing the light bulb moment when somebody finally understands what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I always say to them, if you don't understand me, it's not that you don't understand me. I'm not explaining it well enough for you. So that's always my challenge, to find yet another way of explaining the same thing. And it keeps me on my toes.
Well, sure. And that's a great thing, because you're finding a way to connect with the best way that the student is going to understand and appreciate it. But they're obviously there because they love music, that they still have a passion for it. They still want to be connected to it. But what you're also doing is maybe you're reconnecting the audience to connect with the artist a little bit more as well, and then bring back that standing ovation.
Yes, I think that's a good point. We do want the audience to get a look inside the people's soul. I don't want it to sound all highfalutin, but when somebody sings a song, I want the audience to connect to that performer in the same way that the performer connects to the song. And it's lovely to see when, at the end of a showcase or a recital or something, when the audience members come over to me and say, wow, I never thought of Mary Jane as that kind of a person, but she told the story so well in her song. I feel like I got to know her so much better. And I always want to do a happy dance when people say that,
Sure.
because that's what we're aiming for, is that connection and that community that we get through music. So we haven't been able to have our workshop this time around, obviously, because nobody's meeting in person.
Right.
So every couple of weeks we've been meeting on Zoom, and the class all gets together and we sing for each other. I'm not teaching. I'm just letting people talk about what they're going through, and then everybody sings a song and we all go, hooray, that was great.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
And it's keeping the community alive until we can be together again.
And it's keeping people in shape and keeping them practicing too, because I think it's all too easy when we're out of our normal zone to lose some of those habits. And
oh my God, yes.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, how are you and your husband? Are you guys using music to kind of help you through this quarantine at all?
Well, we haven't been. And it's interesting that you should ask that question, because just yesterday, I said to Ben, I would like to start carving out a little time every day to do some music. I said, I want us to just go through all of the songs that we've ever done. And we've done lots and lots of songs. We've been together and working together for 40 years. Mm-hmm. So I want to just go through the book. I want to start from the beginning and just do some music every day, because my voice really needs it.
Yes.
And I think it'll make us feel happy.
I think it's a twofold thing. I have done a lot of damage to my voice by not using it for long periods of time. And I used to be an okay singer. Now I sometimes can't speak very well, or I'll get really lightheaded if I have to talk a lot, because my vocal cords are just not as strong as they used to be, just from lack of use. but also just the emotional side of it, filling your heart with it, filling your room with it, I think really just makes a big emotional impact on us as well.
I agree. And I also think it's good for you physically. And may I, as teachers, suggest that you just need to start doing some breathing exercises. So there's my 2 cents for the day. There are some wonderful breathing exercises because singing is all about breathing.
Right.
So especially if you do yoga, the breathing for singing and breathing for yoga are not all that dissimilar. So if you want to build up your stamina and your voice, the best way to start is with breathing exercises. So, young man, there you go.
Oh, I didn't expect to get advice, but I'll take it. I will look into that for sure.
You got a lesson today.
I love it. I love it. It's just such a, obviously it's such a passion for you, having sung on Broadway. You've done the national anthem. When you are about to go on stage, do you get nervous? Do you still get butterflies? Is it an excited nervous, or are you just so comfortable with it now that you can just do it?
Well, when I was doing Broadway shows, I was very young and nothing bothered me. I never got nervous. I just went out there, did my show. And I think that happens when you're in a long-running show, and I was in 3 long-running shows. So the nerves really don't come into play because we're so used to doing it. For me, there are people that still, they throw up before every show. Thank God I don't have that. But now that I don't perform as regularly as I used to, I don't get nervous, but I do get excited. I get... I don't get hyper, but I get almost the opposite. I get super calm, and that's how I know I'm really excited. I start talking very slowly.
Wow.
And I get but I know myself, and I know how I am, and I know that means that I'm very excited, and I'm going into overdrive to calm down. And then I just let the energy fly. I love the super duper energy you get from performing. I love the way it feels right before you go on stage, where you just have that hyper awareness, that bigger than life feeling. It's addictive, and I think it's one reason why people just can't give up performing, is because it just feels so good.
Yeah, it really does. When I have people tell me that they did use my music to give birth to, or their kids use it to fall asleep every night. There is such a charge from knowing that something that you created or gave to an audience has really connected with them. I don't think that there's a better feeling in the world to me than that. It's
great. It's just great. I'll tell you what was a better feeling than myself performing was watching my daughter perform on Broadway. Now that's a feeling and an experience that I will never forget. I don't think I ever was so excited and satisfied in my life. It's like all those years of lessons, all the driving to all the dance classes, all of the work, the high school shows, the college shows, everything, to feel all of that culminate in a Broadway show was, I think, the best feeling, better than anything I've ever felt for myself. But I think that's a parent. You feel for your kid far more than you feel for yourself.
Oh, certainly. The closest I come to is when I have a sea monkey that lives for more than 5 days. But I can definitely appreciate where you're coming from on that. So I wanted to ask you now, I know that this got delayed. Obviously, everything's kind of been delayed, but you're involved in a very special Mother's Day event.
Oh, we were supposed to do a great Mother's Day event at the Hollywood Museum. Now, I got to tell your listeners, if they come to LA and are looking for things to do, you got to go to the Hollywood Museum, run by this wonderful woman called Donnell Dadigan. It is one of the best attractions in Hollywood. It's like this best kept secret. They've got so many exhibits about the history of Hollywood, and so many things to do in there. And they have special events, I would say, if not every month, every other month. And the TV moms, we were going to be featured in this really sweet event at the Hollywood Museum, which of course is not going to happen. But as soon as the museum is open, I hope we can reschedule, or maybe we have to wait until next year. But it was going to be just a great bunch of the TV moms, who happen to be a good bunch of girls. I don't know all of them. I know a bunch of them, and we all get along. We have shared experiences, and so there you go. But I hope all your listeners are good to their mom on Mother's Day, and remember Mom, because she never stops thinking about you.
Well, I think it's one of those things that you could just do as an event anytime and people would be interested. But of course, when you can tie it to a holiday, it always is going to have a little bit more of an interest because people are in that emotional connection zone at that time. And I think so many probably do feel connected to the people that we've seen on TV, because families like the Owens, they were families to us that we just couldn't interact with. Like I wanted so many times to just smack Wesley around and say, stop being so difficult to people. It's just wrong. You're a better kid than this. But I think there's a weird camaraderie with people that watch families, whether it be in a TV series or, maybe like a mini series. We just become so invested in the lives of people that aren't real. It's really an amazing thing. It's almost more than people we actually know.
It's funny, isn't it?
It's weird.
You get to a point where you forget that those are actors and you think they're real people, and it's true. You get totally invested in them, and that's why I think casting is so important, especially on television, because you have to be talented, you have to deliver the goods, but you have to be someone that people want to. I mean, I'm not the first person that says this. It's very common. Everybody talks about it. But you have to be someone that people are willing to have in their home with them for years on end, once a week for years on end. And finding the right people for the job, I think, is incredibly important. And I've always been so delighted when people come up to me and say, oh, my God, I loved you. You were like a second mom to me. I used to watch you every day when I did my homework. All of this stuff. It's really sweet. Very sweet.
Yeah, it really is. And that just is, again, another way for you to experience the fact that you really have connected with people, and the things that you're doing are hitting home and touching people's lives, which is wonderful. And I think I can sum it up when they showed the final episode of Lost, some of the cast, I think they were on Jimmy Kimmel, and they took some audience questions after it was over. And one of the guys stood up and he goes, what am I supposed to do now? Because people are so invested in the show and the family. They're like, my life is about to be so empty because you guys no longer exist in my world. And that's really a huge compliment.
It's so true. You just can't believe that. I say, wait a minute, you mean I'm not coming back to work on Monday?
Yeah.
This is like really over? It's certainly, there is a period of adjustment because you're so used to your other family, and we were all so close and saw each other all the time. And then it's over after so many years, and you go, it's like what you just said. What am I supposed to do now? I don't have a job.
Right.
Which is always dreary. But you mean Bob Uecker isn't going to make me laugh every day, and I'm not going to have snacks around, and I have to pick out my own clothes, and I have to put on my own makeup, and what am I going to do with all of this stuff that comes with being so close for so long? It's wow, okay. And I'm really grateful that I had a young child, because I was able to throw all that energy into driving and taking and schlepping and taking care of and cooking and all that stuff that I hadn't been doing for a long time. So I'm grateful that I had a real honest-to-God family that was still there for me and was happy to see me home more.
Sure. Well, I do have one more thing I would like to talk to you about. But before I do, I just happened to find yesterday on YouTube, there's a video called The Final Taping of Mr. Belvedere. And it's a very disjointed but wonderful little tribute. It's just like a bunch of footage that somebody found and they stuck together. It's kind of incoherent, but there's a lot of just very touching moments. And anyone who is a fan of the show, kind of maybe grab a couple of tissues before you sit down and watch it, because it's, seeing the camaraderie of all of you guys and what was really going on behind the scenes. It's very touching, and it makes me appreciate the show even more to know that what I believed the camaraderie was behind the scenes really was there.
Oh, yeah. And, the kids, I'm still in touch with the kids. I had lunch with Tracy a couple of weeks ago. We were all supposed to go do an autograph show together in April that we couldn't do because, everything was canceled.
Sure.
So it's cool. I mean, when I do my cabaret concerts, they come, and when they do stuff, I go, and, that experience is not something that anybody takes lightly, I don't think.
Yeah, it's like being in a band. There's a certain camaraderie that you get being in situations with certain groups of people that you really you can't fully get people to understand what it is. You just have to experience it. But that's great, and I love the commentaries that you guys did. You were so energetic and passionate about the show. They were great commentaries, some of the best I've heard, because you were really into it, and that's another bit that shows me how much it all meant to you. And I just love stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The other question that I wanted to ask you was, I know that you're involved with supporting some of the frontline people that have been really just putting themselves on the line and braving the situation to help keep the world running during this crazy virus thing. How are you involved?
Well, I know this wonderful woman named Maggie Hale, and she has a company called Nutrient Soap, which is a product that it's a powder that has all kinds of good stuff in it, and you sprinkle it in your bathtub, and it's very soothing and calming. And Maggie had the idea of donating a whole bunch of her product to frontline workers, because she thought, who needs to relax in their off time more than the doctors and nurses who are literally risking their lives every single day as we go through this? So she asked some people if we could do some videos where we supported, said, hooray to all of you amazing frontline workers, but more than that, to encourage other companies that had products that might be appreciated by the frontline workers, in addition to, of course, the desperately needed personal protective equipment. But so we said, absolutely, I think that's a great idea. So we've done some videos for her. I've done several other videos for other entities in support of the frontline workers, but I think Maggie had a great idea and thought through. And as you know, as someone who's an independent worker, it's one thing to get a great idea, and it's another thing to see it through. And she had a great idea; she saw it through. And I hope there's a whole bunch of doctors and nurses now who are taking a little time and luxuriating in their bathtubs to Maggie's wonderful nutrient soap. The other thing that I feel very strongly about is the Actors Fund, which is a social service organization, a charity, if you will, that helps serve all entertainment professionals in need, not just actors. And the Actors Fund has been very, very busy during this time, this lockdown quarantine time, in providing help and services to all of the people in our industry, your industry, my industry, the whole entertainment industry, because we don't have an industry anymore.
Right.
It's gone. So the Actors Fund, since this started, has distributed over $8 million, which is almost 3 times as much as we usually distribute in an entire year. We've gone through that much money in 7 weeks.
Wow. So
we're doing as much as we can to raise money and awareness for the Actors Fund. And you in Vegas, there was just a concert that my friend Clint Holmes and Kelly, his wife, were involved with, an online event to raise money for the Actors Fund for the performance in Vegas.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah. So this is, people think, oh, rich actors, what do they need this for? Well, no, it's not rich actors. Most actors are not rich, and most people in the entertainment industry are not actors. So I'm an officer of the fund, so if you have listeners who happen to be in show business who are suffering right now, actorsfund.org, we're there for you. And if you have a couple extra bucks and you want to donate, that would be great too. We're all in this together, as they say, and we have to be kind to each other and do what we can to help.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for helping to facilitate that, because, I have so many friends who are actors in plays here, or musicians or actors in some of the shows here. And, it really does take a toll. I think that Hollywood paints this picture that if you're in a Hollywood movie, you must be rich. And it's so unrealistic. There's so few people that really are. And thank you for helping out. And we need entertainment now more than ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well, Ilene, I could talk to you for hours, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a wonderful time talking to you. Thanks for all that you've given to us as an artist, but also as somebody who supports the arts. You're doing amazing things and helping people on the front line, especially the people in the medical industry. I can't thank you enough for those things. You're absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you. It was a real pleasure talking to you today. Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
You too. Thanks, Ilene. Bye-bye.
Okay.
What just an amazing, talented, and humble, and sweet, and intelligent person. I really, really enjoyed talking to her, and I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to my conversation with Ilene. Absolutely amazing and a wonderful woman. Thanks again, Ilene, for taking some time out of your schedule and all these wonderful things that you're doing for people to chat with me about the wonderful things you're doing for people. So that's the show this week, guys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, requests for guests, or anything like that, please send me an email at scott@scotthaskin.com. And if I don't answer you within a couple of days, feel free to send it again. And feel free to share, like, love, subscribe, whatever options that you have on your app or wherever you listen to the show. And we'll see you next week for another episode of the Haskincast podcast.